He shoved her hard against the hood, ignoring the stars on her uniform, the medals on her chest, and the power behind her silence. Lieutenant General Leona Marshall, a decorated Black U.S. Army officer, stood still, not out of fear, but out of restraint. The cop thought he was in control. He had no idea he'd just assaulted a woman who commands armies. But why didn't she fight back? And what happened next that made him instantly regret everything? If you believe silence can be louder than rage, like, share, and subscribe. Now let's begin this powerful, true story. It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon on Route 17. Sunlight scattered across the road, and the hum of passing cars blended into the ordinary rhythm of a southern town. Nothing looked out of place until Officer Brent O'Connor flipped on his siren and pulled behind a black SUV parked just a little too neatly near the edge of the road. He stepped out like he owned the pavement boots, heavy gaze, sharp. His voice crackled through the open air. "Step out of the vehicle, now. There was no license and registration, ma'am. No reason stated, no courtesy given. Just a command." The driver's door opened slowly. Out stepped a tall black woman, maybe late 50s, calm as still water. She wore jeans and a tan overcoat. But beneath it, if anyone had looked closely, there was the sharp collar of a pressed military uniform peeking out. "My name is Leona Marshall," she said evenly. "Is there a reason I'm being stopped?" Officer Brent didn't answer her question, didn't look her in the eye. He pointed to the side of the road. "Hands where I can see 'em. Step away from the vehicle." Leona didn't flinch. "I haven't done anything unlawful. I'd appreciate it if I said move." The next few seconds felt like a spark hitting dry brush. Brent grabbed her arm, spun her around with unnecessary force, and slammed her chest first onto the hood of her SUV. The metal rang out. Her cap tumbled off and rolled onto the pavement. That's when it happened. The jacket she wore slid open slightly as she struggled to keep her footing, and there, pinned to the shoulder of her uniform, clear as day, were 3 gleaming silver stars. A full lieutenant general. A woman who'd led troops into war. A woman whose name echoed in military briefings and classified reports. A woman who'd briefed the Pentagon and walked through fire more times than Brent O'Connor could ever imagine. But in that moment, he saw none of it. Or perhaps he saw it and chose not to care. A man walking his dog a few feet away froze, his phone lifted almost instinctively. "You see this?" he whispered to no one in particular. "That's a general. Is he out of his damn mind?" Brent yanked her arms behind her back. Leona didn't resist. Her face rested sideways on the car hood, eyes steady, not afraid, not angry, just watching him, studying him. It was the kind of look that didn't shout. It didn't threaten. It simply said, "I see you, and I will remember this moment more clearly than you ever will." He was breathing hard. Maybe it was the sun. Or maybe it was something else, a flicker of doubt, a whisper of something sinking in. His eyes dropped to her shoulder. The stars. His jaw locked. He stepped back. Half a step. Then another. Silence hung between them, thicker than the heat in the air. But the damage was done. The cap was still on the ground. Her uniform creased from the pressure. Her dignity untouched, but his conscience. That was another story. For a beat, no one moved. Then she finally spoke. Softly. Measured. "You didn't even ask why I was parked here." Brent's lips parted, but no sound came out. Leona straightened, dusted herself off, and picked up her cap with grace that made the whole scene feel even more humiliating for him. He took one more look at those stars. This time, not with arrogance, but with something close to fear. But it was already too late. Someone had captured it all, the video, the moment, the mistake. And just like that, a routine stop had turned into something far bigger, something irreversible. They called it a traffic stop, but the internet called it something else. By mid-morning, the footage had already stormed across platforms like a tidal wave. 42 seconds. One black woman, one white officer, one quiet stare that shook a nation. The headline that caught fire read, "White Cop Assaults Black General Watch Her Eyes." The video was raw, no edits, no music, just brutal truth. The camera caught Brent's hand slamming Leona's face against the hood, the stars gleaming on her shoulder, the disbelief in a bystander's voice. "That's a general, man. He's gonna lose everything." Within hours, media outlets confirmed it. Lieutenant General Leona Marshall, combat decorated, strategist, national icon in military circles, and now a symbol. Cable news couldn't stop replaying the footage. Each time they slowed it down, paused it at the moment Brent realized what he'd done, his eyes darting to her rank, his body tensing, lips parting just slightly, like a man staring into his own ruin. By that afternoon, the police department issued a short, deflective statement. Officer O'Connor has been placed on leave pending internal investigation. At this time, evidence does not suggest malicious intent. Malicious intent. Those two words detonated across the internet. TikTok clips raged back. "So we're roughing up generals now and calling it an accident. Intent doesn't matter. Impact does." Outside the precinct, protesters swarmed with handmade signs. "She wore 3 stars. He saw her skin." Dismissed without dignity. Fox anchors spun a different angle. She wasn't in full uniform. She didn't identify herself. She resisted. But people weren't buying it. Because in that video, Leona wasn't yelling. She wasn't even angry. She just looked at him. And that somehow was more powerful than outrage. Still, Leona said nothing. No tweet. No statement. No CNN interview. She declined every invitation, every microphone. Her lawyer, when asked, gave only one sentence. Lieutenant General Marshall believes her silence speaks louder than anything else. And it did. The silence wasn't passive. It was deafening. It turned into a mirror, forcing the country to look at itself. Meanwhile, Brent was unraveling. His wife unplugged the landline. The voicemails were getting darker. "She served this country. You served your ego. You're lucky we're only using words." At home, Brent watched the video in the dark, over and over. Each time his throat tightened when he saw her face, serene, calm, unreadable. He muttered into the silence, almost pleading with no one. She should have just said something. Worn the whole damn uniform. How was I supposed to know? His teenage son burst into tears at school when another kid shoved a phone in his face. "Your daddy assault generals now." Even Brent's neighbors, once polite, stopped waving. And yet, Leona remained off-grid. No podium, no staged photo ops, just silence. The silence became the story. That night on national television, a journalist in a sharp gray suit leaned forward and said, "We've seen protests before. But this is different." She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to explain. The country is speaking for her because her restraint has become the message. In the shadows, Brent whispered to his wife, "You think she'll forgive me? Say it was a mistake." She stared at him, then turned away. "She doesn't have to forgive you. The whole world already judged you." Back online, the video had passed 12 million views. People weren't asking what happened anymore. They were asking, why didn't she say a word? What is she planning next? And that question, that unknown, was far more terrifying than any speech. The calls started coming in the next morning, not from the press, not from protesters, but from inside the system. Pentagon officials, state security advisors, even a carefully worded voicemail from a certain senator's chief of staff, all with the same message. We'd like to avoid escalation. They use the same polished words, phrases wrapped in velvet, but cold as steel. Public morale is fragile right now. A general's presence carries symbolic weight. A brief, reassuring statement would help settle things. In other words, say something calm, smile, apologize even if you're the one bleeding. But Leona didn't bite. She just listened. Let them speak. then quietly said, "Noted." Later that afternoon, Colonel Travis Banks, an old friend from her academy days, showed up uninvited. He didn't wear his uniform, didn't bring flowers, just 2 coffees and a face tight with tension. They sat outside her apartment, city sirens in the background, sunlight scattered through tree branches. "Leo," he started, "I know you. You're not reckless, but this thing, it's bigger than both of us." She sipped her coffee, raised an eyebrow. "You think I don't know that? Then help me understand why you won't just make a public statement, not even a soft one, just to cool things down. The brass is worried. Hell, they think you're about to torch the whole chain of command." Leona leaned back, the hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "Travis, you really think I've stayed quiet because I'm afraid?" He blinked, then chuckled awkwardly. "I guess not. Good. Because fear's never been part of my equation." That night, Brent O'Connor made a move. He posted a video from his living room shirt, slightly wrinkled face, pale. "I just want to say I'm sorry. I didn't recognize who she was. I was doing my job. But I never meant." The rest was drowned in sarcasm. The internet lit him up like a bonfire. "Didn't recognize a 3-star general." You didn't need to. You just had to recognize she was human. Too little. Too performative. Too late. Some even spliced his apology over the original footage, playing his remorse on one side of the screen, while his hands slammed Leona into the car on the other. Meanwhile, the pressure inside the police department hit boiling point. The chief scheduled a press conference trying to pivot, "We respect the military." This was a tragic misunderstanding. Officer O'Connor has served the community with distinction, but in the middle of the carefully staged event, a voice interrupted. Sergeant Natalie Diaz, a Latina officer in full uniform, stepped up to the microphone uninvited. Her voice didn't shake. "With respect, Chief, misunderstanding isn't what we all saw. What we saw was unchecked aggression, and some of us in this department are tired of pretending that's okay." Gasps echoed. Cameras zoomed, and once again the narrative spun out of the hands of those trying to control it. Across town, Leona sat in the corner of a quiet hospital room. Her mother, aged and gentle, lay propped up on pillows, her hair thinning but her eyes sharp. They didn't talk about the news, not directly. Instead, her mother asked about the old garden back home, if the magnolias had bloomed yet. If Leona remembered how she used to tuck notes under her pillow as a child, pretending they were battle orders from God. And then, after a long silence, her mother said, "I've watched you walk through war. I've seen you carry men on your back. I've seen you bleed without flinching. But what you're doing now, Leona..." Her voice cracked slightly. "This kind of silence, the kind that holds back an entire firestorm, that's the loudest sound I've ever heard come from you." Leona didn't reply. She didn't have to. She simply leaned forward, rested her forehead gently against her mother's, and closed her eyes. Somewhere in the background, a news anchor's voice echoed from the hospital TV. Still no word from General Marshall. But sources say internal conversations at the highest levels are intensifying. Back at the police precinct, Brent sat alone in a break room no one dared enter. His badge was gone. His locker emptied. On the table sat a printed-out tweet that someone had left anonymously. It read, "The day you touched her, you touched every woman who's ever been silent to survive." He stared at it, and for the first time his hands trembled. No press conferences, no interviews, not even a tweet. Leona Marshall hadn't said a single word publicly since the incident, and yet her silence echoed louder than 1,000 protests. What most people didn't know, what even Brent O'Connor would never understand, was that Leona's silence wasn't about fear. It was about memory. A decade ago, during a routine deployment in Kandahar, she had watched one of her best soldiers, Elijah Petty, bleed out in the back of a transport. The team had requested evacuation hours earlier, but the brass, under political pressure to minimize optics, denied the call. Elijah died clutching Leona's hand, whispering, "Make it count, ma'am." From that moment, Leona vowed never again would she trade integrity for approval. Never again would she speak just because someone powerful wanted her to. And now, here she was at the center of a firestorm, her silence both a shield and a weapon. That morning, she sat at her desk with a plain white envelope in her hands. Inside was a handwritten letter. She had addressed it not to Brent, but to his mother. "Dear Mrs. O'Connor, I don't know you. You don't know me. But I suspect you know what it means to raise a child to tell right from wrong and to ache when they lose their way. I hold no hatred toward your son. What he did was not just a failure of character, but a failure of the culture that shaped him. I don't need an apology. I hope he learns. We teach our children discipline not for the sake of control, but for the sake of conscience. With respect, Lieutenant General Leona Marshall." She sealed it, tucked it into her coat pocket, and headed out. That afternoon, Major Alvarez from the Army's legal division requested a private meeting. A sharp, no-nonsense Latina in her late 30s, Alvarez didn't waste time. "I'll get straight to it, General. The Congressional Oversight Committee is launching an inquiry. They want you to testify." Leona raised an eyebrow, her face unreadable. "You mean they want me to perform?" Alvarez didn't blink. "They want to put a uniform on their headlines. And frankly, ma'am, we could use your voice." Leona leaned back in her chair. "With all due respect, Major, I'm not here to make people feel better about a broken system. I'm not interested in symbolism." Alvarez hesitated. "It's not about comfort. It's about precedent. If you don't speak, they'll assume silence means complicity." Leona's eyes narrowed. "No, they'll assume silence is weakness. That's their mistake." She stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind her back. "I've buried too many soldiers, Major. Too many good men and women who never got a headline. When I look at these stars on my shoulder, I don't see power. I see memory. I see weight." Alvarez opened her mouth but didn't speak. She knew better than to argue with grief wrapped in dignity. Across town, Brent O'Connor sat alone on his back porch, a half-empty bottle of whiskey at his feet. His hands trembled. His phone buzzed with another death threat. He didn't answer. He hadn't answered in days. Inside, his wife packed a suitcase. "I'm taking the kids," she said quietly. "I can't shield them from this anymore." Brent didn't look up. "I never meant for this to happen." She paused at the door. "You never meant to get caught. That's the difference." Back in Leona's world, the silence thickened, but something was shifting beneath it. At a press briefing later that week, a surprise came this time from within the police department. A young black female officer, Sergeant Nia Rhodes, stood up during the Q&A. "I've served with honor for 12 years, she said, voice steady. "I've taken oaths. I've buried friends. And I watched that video just like all of you. If we can't call wrong what it is, then our badge doesn't mean justice. It means silence." The room froze. Cameras snapped. The chief of police avoided her gaze. That night, as national news replayed Rhodes's clip over and over, Leona's phone buzzed with a message from Colonel Travis, her old friend who had once urged her to stay quiet. But this time, he wasn't offering comfort. "She's not playing along," he said grimly over the call. "They're getting nervous. Someone's going to make a move soon. You should be careful." Leona closed her eyes. She wasn't afraid. But she was aware silence had a cost, and hers was gaining interest. You could almost feel it, the shift. Not in the streets, not on the news, but in the air. Something darker had started moving beneath the surface, and it began with a lie. A new video was posted anonymously on a fringe political forum. Then it appeared on a low-tier blog. Hours later, it exploded across mainstream feeds. The title, "General Leona Marshall's Racist Remarks Against White Soldiers. Watch Her Words." The footage was choppy, clearly edited. It showed Leona in uniform speaking to a group of soldiers during a classified debrief from years ago, except her words were cut, spliced, rearranged. In the video, it sounded like she was saying, "White soldiers lack discipline. They've failed this country more than once." The real sentence, "One undisciplined unit, regardless of race, can fail the mission." We don't get second chances out there. But the damage was done. Within hours, conservative media hosts were asking dangerous questions. Was this woman ever fit to lead? Is this the real Leona Marshall behind the medals? A segment aired on cable news titled, "From Hero to Hypocrite." At first, Leona didn't respond. Her silence was deliberate, measured. But this time, the silence wasn't met with respect. It was twisted into guilt. Across town, Major Alvarez slammed her phone down. "This is coordinated," she muttered. She opened her laptop, pulled up the metadata from the fake video. IP routes were masked, but one pinged from an internal network, the Department of Defense, and the name buried in the metadata string T. Reynolds, Colonel Travis Reynolds. Alvarez's stomach turned. He'd been Leona's friend, her sounding board. He was the one who told her, "Don't stir the waters." Now it looked like he'd been muddying them all along. Meanwhile, Brent O'Connor, disgraced, isolated, trying to piece together what remained of his dignity, was at the precinct to submit forms for unpaid leave. As he passed by an open break room, a voice caught his ear. "She's still not backing down. Then we keep applying pressure. A few more headlines and she'll be too toxic to touch. We move forward as planned." The voice was Travis. Brent froze. Something about the way he spoke. The ease, the calculation, it made Brent's stomach twist. Back at Leona's home, her phone buzzed. A message from Alvarez. "General, there's more to this than the arrest. Someone wants you erased, not silenced. Erased." Leona sat quietly for a moment, then closed the message. She looked out the window, the city glowing faintly beneath the dusk. Later that evening, the phone rang again. This time, it wasn't military, it was the hospital. Her mother, Mrs. Clara Marshall, had been in a car accident, a hit from behind at an intersection. The driver fled. Witnesses said the car had been idling nearby for nearly 20 minutes before impact. Police were still investigating. Leona rushed to the hospital. Her mother had survived, but barely. Broken ribs, concussion, internal bruising. She was unconscious. The doctors said it could be hours or days. As Leona sat beside the bed, staring at the pale, fragile face of the woman who had raised her to be iron-hearted, but soul-deep, something inside her cracked. This wasn't just about her anymore. She reached for her mother's hand and whispered, "They're not going to win, Mama. I promise you that." Somewhere far away, Travis was sipping whiskey on a rooftop patio with a journalist smirking as he handed over a new tip. "A source close to General Marshall says she's unstable," he said, feigning concern. "Officers in the field have questioned her decisions before. There's more under the surface. Keep digging." And the journalist? Hungry. Desperate for clicks. He didn't even ask who the source was. As the nation turns against her and the walls begin to close in, Leona finally makes a decision that changes everything. But what she chooses shocks even those closest to her. It wasn't just a hit and run. Alvarez had known it the moment she saw the footage from the traffic camera. The car that struck Leona's mother, an unmarked black sedan, was traced back to a military vehicle pool outside Arlington. Restricted access, logged only to personnel with clearance. And the man who signed it out, Staff Sergeant Ray Doyle, recently discharged, former unit member under Colonel Travis Reynolds. Alvarez's heart sank as she reviewed the name. The timeline, the proximity. Too many pieces fit too neatly. She took a breath and called Leona. Leona was sitting alone in the hospital cafeteria, coffee cold, untouched. When she heard Alvarez's voice say, the driver was from Travis's old team, she didn't flinch, didn't blink. She just stared ahead, the silence around her thick as fog. "Do we have proof?" he was ordered. Leona asked, her voice steady. No, not yet. Travis denies even knowing Doyle was in the area. Called it a coincidence. Leona stood slowly, voice lower now. Then it's time I speak to him myself. That afternoon, Leona drove to Fort Haven, the old training grounds. Travis had retreated there for a mental health sabbatical after the backlash started closing in. She found him by the firing range, polishing a weapon like nothing in the world was wrong. When he saw her, his smile was thin. You look tired, he said casually. She didn't return the smile. Your fingerprints are all over this, she said. He shrugged. I don't know what you're talking about. You do, she replied softly. And I think somewhere a part of you regrets it. Don't get sentimental, he scoffed. I gave you a chance to avoid this mess. I told you to stay quiet. Leona stepped closer, her boots crunching over gravel. You could have stood beside me, like we used to. But you chose this coward's path. Travis's eyes flashed. Don't pretend you're so pure, Leona. You've made enemies, powerful ones. I'm just surviving. She held his gaze, calm, not angry, not broken. You think survival means stepping on others? She said. But that's not strength, Travis. That's surrender disguised as strategy. Then she turned, walked away. And for the first time, Travis didn't call after her. Meanwhile, the investigation into Brent O'Connor remained stalled. Internal affairs had frozen. The police union stalled. But the FBI had begun reviewing the incident, especially now with the car crash and Travis's name whispered too many times in back channels. Brent felt it. The walls closing in. He hadn't slept in 2 nights. His wife had taken the kids to her sister's. His lawyer stopped answering calls. He sat alone in a church pew, shoulders hunched, head bowed. Father Doyle, no relation to the driver, approached slowly. You've been here 3 nights in a row, the priest said gently. Brent lifted his eyes, raw and haunted. I thought I was protecting the system, he said. But I was just a pawn, and now I can't look at myself in the mirror. The priest nodded. Then maybe it's time to stop hiding. Brent looked up. Even if it means they come for me next, Father Doyle replied. There's peace in telling the truth, even if it comes at a cost. The next morning, Leona returned home to find a man standing by her gate. Brent. He looked 10 years older than the last time she saw him. Unshaven, palms sweating, but his eyes held something different this time. Not arrogance, not fear, resolve. I need to talk, he said. Leona didn't say a word. She just opened the gate. Inside, he sat on the edge of the chair like he didn't belong, because deep down, he knew he didn't. I know who's behind this, Brent said. The video, the car, the threats. I can name names, give you recordings, but I need protection. Leona studied him carefully. He wasn't lying. You'll testify, she asked. He nodded. I will, on record. I'll face them all. If you promise I won't disappear in a ditch. For a moment she said nothing. Then finally, you're not the one who should be afraid anymore. With Brent ready to turn whistleblower and the FBI circling closer, Leona must decide how far she's willing to go to expose the truth and who she's willing to bring down to do it. Brent sat in the dim corner of the church basement, hands clasped, eyes red. The ticking clock was louder than it should have been, like it was counting down something he could no longer stop. Across from him sat Leona, her posture still and composed. She hadn't said a word since he arrived. She just listened. I didn't know what I was walking into, Brent began. Travis told me. He told me you weren't anyone, just a face in a uniform. He said, that woman thinks she's powerful, but all she's got is fabric and metals. We don't answer to fabric. Leona didn't flinch. I believed him, Brent continued, voice cracking. And now, I don't sleep. I don't eat. I drink until I can't feel my own shame. My wife's gone. My little girl cries when I come near. and maybe I deserve it. Still, she remained silent, but something shifted in her eyes, less judgment, more sorrow. That was somehow harder to take. I want to come clean, Brent said, almost whispering. But if I speak, they'll tear me apart. My badge, my family, everything. Finally, Leona spoke. Calm, low, steady. And if you don't speak, Brent looked up at her, then they'll do it again to someone else. That was enough. Leona made one phone call. A contact at the FBI. She didn't say much, she didn't have to. By midnight, Brent was under federal protection. The next day, agents swept through the precinct, pulling communications logs, reviewing surveillance footage, tracing phone calls. One camera, barely functioning, captured a hallway meeting weeks before the incident. In the grainy footage, Travis stood before 3 officers. His voice was hard to hear, but one line was unmistakable. Push her car. Let it look like an accident. Don't kill her, just remind her this isn't her playground. The room fell silent when the line played. One of the agents quietly murmured, "This changes everything." Meanwhile, Leona sat alone in her office writing. Not orders, not memos, a declaration. A personal statement to the public, to her soldiers, to the nation. She wrote about honor, not just the medals, but what you carry when no one's watching. She wrote about silence, not as surrender, but as resistance. She didn't name Travis or Brent or anyone else. She didn't have to. She was writing to something bigger. Her hand paused at the final line. She stared at the blinking cursor, then typed, "Courage isn't loud. Sometimes it walks alone, unseen, but it always leaves a mark." That night, a quiet meeting took place at the Pentagon. One commissioner, an older woman with gray hair and steady eyes, placed Leona's statement on the table. She looked around the room. "She's not just writing this for closure," the commissioner said. "She's preparing something." Someone asked, "What?" The commissioner didn't blink. "A reckoning." Then she turned to Leona. "You want real justice? Bring this into court. Let the silence speak under oath." Leona closed the folder in her lap. She didn't answer, not yet. But something about her stillness said she would. The courtroom was packed. Cameras buzzed, reporters lined the back wall. Every eye in the room turned when Brent O'Connor stepped forward and raised his right hand. The bailiff's voice echoed, "Do you swear to tell the truth? The whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" Brent nodded, voice low. "I do." He took a shaky breath, then began. "I was the officer who assaulted General Leona Marshall." Gasps rippled across the gallery, but I wasn't just acting on my own anger. I was manipulated. I was told she was dangerous. I was told she didn't deserve to wear the uniform. He turned his eyes to the gallery. That was a lie, all of it. For a moment, the room fell silent. Then the prosecution called Leona to the stand. As she rose, the room held its breath. She wore her uniform, 3 silver stars shining bright. She walked slowly, but with the calm of someone who knew the storm was behind her, not ahead. When she sat down, her voice was quiet but steady. For a long time, she began. I stayed silent. Not because I was weak, but because I thought my silence might protect the very institution I gave my life to. She glanced at the jurors, but silence too can become a shield for injustice. She paused. I'm here now because justice demands voice, because the truth doesn't whisper, it roars. From the audience, Brent's mother wiped tears from her eyes. She didn't speak, but her gaze never left Leona. Then came the turn of Colonel Travis. He had refused to appear voluntarily, but the judge, having reviewed mounting evidence, issued a subpoena. And when Travis was brought in flanked by U.S. Marshals, he didn't carry his usual arrogance. He looked cornered, exposed. Alvarez, calm and prepared, stepped up to testify. He laid out documents, emails, audio files. They revealed a pattern backroom meetings coded language donations from an extremist group known as Blue Shield, and a long chain of actions meant to discredit and destabilize high-ranking officers who didn't fit a certain mold, Leona being one of them. Alvarez spoke directly to the judge. Your Honor, this wasn't just about one violent encounter. This was a coordinated effort to weaponize prejudice from within. The courtroom grew heavy. When asked to speak, Travis refused, but the judge was unmoved. You will answer these charges, Colonel. A clip was played next. Surveillance footage. In it, Travis's voice could be heard grainy but clear. Push her just enough. She'll break. And when she does, she's done. No need to kill her. Just shake the pedestal. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. The jury stiffened. But Leona didn't flinch. She closed her eyes for a moment, then looked straight ahead. Finally, the judge turned to her. General Marshall, is there anything else you wish to say before this court concludes? Leona stood. For a moment, she just looked at the room, at Brent, at his mother, at Travis in handcuffs. And then she said with quiet conviction, I've buried too many friends in silence. I won't bury the truth with them. She nodded once, then sat down. No dramatic flourish, just the sound of resolve. As the judge announced that Travis would be remanded into custody pending further charges, a hush fell again. Leona looked down. Tears welled in her eyes, not from vengeance, not from relief, but from something deeper. A wound that had finally been named. Justice had spoken. And this time it hadn't whispered. The courtroom was quiet, still holding the weight of the verdict. Travis was gone. Justice had found him. But the story wasn't finished. Not yet. Leona stood at the courthouse steps, her eyes steady, her voice measured. Reporters circled like hawks, but she didn't flinch. Brent stood beside her, unshackled, yet visibly humbled. He wore a plain suit, not the uniform he once thought gave him power. This time his silence wasn't arrogance. It was shame. Leona turned to face the cameras. I will not press charges against Officer Brent O'Connor, she said. Murmurs erupted, but she added, her tone sharpening like a blade. He will spend the next 2 years serving our veterans, specifically veterans of color, whose voices are often forgotten and whose service is often ignored. Brent looked down, then stepped up to the mic. His hands shook slightly. She could destroy me, he said, voice raw. And she didn't. Instead, she's forcing me to confront the very system I served and the people I hurt by protecting it. The headlines the next morning read, She could destroy him, she chose to rebuild him. It wasn't praise. It was a challenge to the nation, to every badge, every uniform, every citizen. At the Pentagon, the ripple had already begun. Files long buried were unearthed. Investigations reopened. Officers once protected by silence now felt the chill of accountability. Leona stayed away from the spotlight, but her impact was everywhere. One afternoon, as she exited a veterans' hospital, a young black female soldier no older than 21 approached her. General Marshal Leona turned. Yes, the girl saluted. I wanted to thank you, not just for what you did, but for how you did it. Leona offered a gentle smile. You mean by staying quiet? The girl nodded. No one thought silence could roar, but yours did. Leona placed a hand on her shoulder. Silence is only powerful when it comes from a place of strength, not fear. The soldier swallowed hard. Because of you, we know that integrity doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it stands still and dares the world to see it. Leona looked away, blinking against the sun. Make sure you live that truth, even when it costs you. Days later, Brent showed up at the small rehabilitation center where Leona's mother was recovering. His clothes were neat. His eyes carried storms. He stood at her doorway holding a small bouquet of sunflowers. Mrs. Marshall, he asked softly. She turned her head slowly from the window, her voice cool but steady. You're the officer who put your knee on my daughter's back. Brent nodded, jaw clenched. Yes, ma'am. He held out the flowers. I came to apologize, not just for what I did, but for everything I refused to see. She didn't take the flowers. She just looked at him, looked through him. "You think flowers undo damage?" she asked. Brent lowered his hand. "No, but I'm here to start something. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to earn decency." She studied him, eyes sharp as Leona's. "Decency," she repeated. "That's a heavy word, officer. Heavier than a badge." He looked down. "I know." She slowly extended her hand, not to shake his, but to rest it on his chest. "Then don't earn it with words," she said, her voice cracking just slightly. "Earn it with work." He nodded, eyes watering. "Yes, ma'am." As he left, one of the nurses whispered to her, "You didn't even let him apologize properly." The older woman smiled faintly. That wasn't an apology. That was the beginning of his test. Back at her home that evening, Leona sat on her porch with a notebook in her lap. The world outside was still chaotic. Protests, debates, reckonings. But inside, she'd found stillness. She wasn't angry anymore, just tired and ready. She flipped to a fresh page and began to write her final statement. Not to the press, not to the army, but to the people. The last line read, "You don't have to be loud to be brave. You just have to stand and not move when the world tells you to kneel." And in that moment, she finally understood what her mother had meant weeks ago. Sometimes silence is the loudest gun you can fire. 1 year later, the world had changed. Not in loud, sweeping ways, but in quiet ones. The kind you only notice if you're still enough to feel them. Leona Marshall had officially retired. No more uniforms, no more orders, no more reports signed at dawn. Instead, she stood now on stages, libraries, town halls, military academies, speaking to rooms full of people who thought strength had to shout. Her talks were never long, never rehearsed, just honest. She called her lecture series The Power of Silence. Some showed up expecting anger, others came hoping for vengeance, but what they got was something different. Clarity. On a crisp spring morning in D.C., the Department of Defense held a public ceremony on the National Mall. Flags rustled in the breeze, cameras clicked like insects. Leona stood center stage as the Secretary of Defense approached with a velvet box. Today, he announced, we award General Leona Marshall the Medal of Honor again, not for a battlefield victory, but for showing this nation that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits, watches, and when it moves with precision. Thunderous applause followed, but Leona didn't smile for the cameras. Her eyes found the crowd and paused on one familiar face. Brent. He stood in the back, not in uniform, no cameras pointed at him. But he was there holding a notebook and a copy of his new book tucked under one arm. The title read, The Cop Who Learned to Listen. Meanwhile, Alvarez had traded courtroom drama for classrooms. He now ran an ethics program for young military officers. The first lecture in the course was always the same, the Marshall case, not as a warning, but as a compass. He'd say, integrity is what you do when no one's watching, but leadership. That's what you do when everyone is. In a quiet auditorium at a small college in North Carolina, Leona finished another lecture. The lights dimmed. The crowd stood to applaud. But as the audience filed out, a young black girl lingered near the edge of the stage. She looked about 15 with tight braids and a notebook hugged to her chest. Leona spotted her. "You got a question?" she asked gently. The girl nodded, stepped closer and asked, "Why didn't you just yell? From the very beginning? Why didn't you scream at them?" The room grew quiet again. Leona looked at her. Not past her, not through her, at her. She smiled and said, "Because sometimes the world's too noisy to hear a scream. But if you walk slow enough, if you hold your ground long enough, your silence becomes the only thing they can't ignore." The girl blinked, taking it in, then slowly nodded like the words had just changed something inside her. Leona reached out, touched her shoulder. "Make sure your silence comes from truth. not fear. Then, let it echo. Later that night, Leona sat by the window in her modest home just outside Arlington. Her mother, now walking again, sipped tea beside her. "You were always the loud one in the family," her mother teased. Leona chuckled. "Funny how I made the most noise by saying the least." They sat quietly for a moment, watching the moonlight paint silver across the porch. Then her mother added, "It wasn't silence, baby. It was restraint. And that's a different kind of courage." Across the country, stories began surfacing. An officer in Chicago refused to arrest a veteran without due process. A military recruit reported a racist comment and her commander acted immediately. A judge in Texas quoted Leona's case in a ruling about accountability. None of it made national headlines. But all of it mattered. Weeks later, Leona received a letter from a former cadet. It read, "I used to think speaking up was the bravest thing you could do. Now I know. Sometimes the bravest thing is to wait and let your truth walk in before you do." Leona folded the letter, placed it in a drawer filled with others like it. She didn't need a monument. She didn't want a statue. She had something better. A legacy whispered in classrooms, recited in training, passed hand to hand like a compass pointing north. At the very end of the year, during her final public appearance, before stepping back from the spotlight entirely, a journalist asked, "What do you want to be remembered for?" Leona paused. She looked out at the crowd, young soldiers, teachers, veterans, mothers, even skeptics, and she answered softly, "For proving that silence is not surrender." She stepped off the stage, and the only sound that followed was the echo of her footsteps. If this story moved you, if it made you pause, reflect, or feel something deep, then we hope you'll take a moment to let it live beyond just this screen. Leona's silence wasn't weakness. It was a quiet kind of strength, rooted in honor, restraint, and purpose. Her story reminds us that real courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply stands still and lets the truth speak for itself. If you found meaning in this journey, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful, human-driven storytelling. Every click, every comment, every share, it fuels our passion to keep bringing you these stories that matter. And with your support, we can keep shining a light on voices too often overlooked. Here at Mr. Mac's Stories, we believe that truth may whisper, but when it does, it echoes. Thanks for being part of that echo. We'll see you in the next story.